Hi, this is John Pettigrew, and you're listening to Talking Through My Hat, a podcast that explores bookish businesses, the fantastic people who create them, and what those people have learned. I'm a hat wearer, a recovering editor, and the creator of Future Proofs, enabling editors and authors to work better online. To find out more, visit wearefutureproofs.com or follow me on Twitter at John_Pettigrew. Welcome to this week's Talking Through My Hat. Today I'm talking with Ron Martinez, founder and principal of design and product innovation firm Invention Arts, and also a prolific inventor himself with more than 60 patents in the fields of media, mobile and social technologies and commerce. He's worked in intellectual property innovation for Yahoo and enjoyed a long and successful career designing, producing and coding consumer software products, including pioneering interactive fiction, entertainment and educational software, massively multiplayer games, and when he was younger, he's even written fiction, young adult books and comics. So welcome to the podcast, Ron.
Thanks, John. Nice to be here.
You've always been a kind of a software and digital product person, it seems. What's it like kind of working in publishing now, which always seem to have some sort of core aversion to digital products?
Yeah, well, ain't that the truth? Well, you know, there are some remarkable bright spots in the publishing industry, people who are true innovators and really do remarkable things. Coming into the digital realm so many decades ago really was rooted in my desire to build new forms of narrative. I had always I was an aspiring writer when I was young, working odd jobs. I was a commercial shell fisherman for 3 years, living on the bay and just writing every day, poetry and fiction, and trying to create, non-ordinary approaches to fiction. Mm-hmm. And then I let the boat go a little bit and moved into Manhattan. I was in New York. I was originally born in the Bronx, and so I moved into Manhattan, and I was fortunate enough to start writing like for Heavy Metal magazine, and I had a Playboy comic strip. Oddly enough, so it was tough because it was actually my first publication, and I couldn't really share it with Mom. I'm published, Mom, because it's Playboy, but they did pay well. Anyway, there was a fellow named Byron Price who was a book packager. Okay. And he's a very innovative guy, and he had a company called Byron Price Visual Publications. So he's focused on visual books. Mm-hmm. And he started doing these pathway books for children, which were, if you want to, you've shown up at grandma's house. If you want to hear check out what that weird sound is upstairs, turn to page 12. Okay. If you want to go see grandma, turn to page 9. Right?
Kind of choose your own adventure still. Yeah.
Exactly. So he created a series called Be an Interplanetary Spy, which was visual puzzles wrapped around, or a narrative wrapped around visual puzzles that was nonlinear and branching. And so he, needing to eat, I said, okay. So I wrote one of those. I wrote another one, had a facility for it. He started doing graphic adventures in some of the early microcomputers. And he was licensing science fiction, so he got the rights to Rendezvous with Rama, which was a great science fiction book by Arthur C. Clarke. Yeah. I got to work with Arthur C. Clarke, actually, remotely via phone from his lair in Sri Lanka. Yeah. And so I did an adaptation of this novel to create an interactive story. It was great because I had studied things like Vladimir Nabokov's lectures on literature and how he would break down an environment and the timing and in fiction as a sort of simulation. And so here was a simulation of a fictional world that was a living, in a sense, through the medium of software. And so that, and I promise I won't tell you my entire life history here, but this is a sort of a key moment for me, because having an interest in imagining narrative for some reason. This struck me as a very interesting way and powerful way to reimagine narrative if you make the reader the protagonist of the story and the story active and responsive. And so I learned how to program because I wanted to build systems myself, interactive fiction systems, rather than rely upon engineers. Yeah. Maybe that sounds familiar for life. So you could directly build those things. And then I was off to the races. And so I ended up building all those massively multiplayer games and narrative simulations, political simulations, and so on. And
Mm.
so coming into publishing, after doing that for some time, and then a 4-year stint as head of intellectual property innovation, building a large-scale sort of patent portfolio, defensive patent portfolio for Yahoo, working with some of the brilliant people that were there in that 14,000 person global company.
Yeah.
Between 2005 and 2009, it came back out and formed Invention Arts.
Yeah.
And we did some more of that, large-scale innovation projects for the World Economic Forum or Finnish government, private companies and so on.
Uh-huh.
But it was always that love of books and storytelling, and being published by Simon & Schuster in the early days to make Star Trek interactive fiction and so on, that brought me back to books.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got there. And then, it was a question of, well, what's happening in books that is amenable to or susceptible to the blandishments of the digital media.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that you'd been working at Yahoo, a very big company, kind of very senior position, and they're in charge of heavy legal stuff. And then you kind of went out and set up your own business. How did you make that transition? Why did you make that transition from the corporate to your own business?
Right. Well, so at Yahoo, even though I was a vice president in the legal division, I'm not an attorney. And so my remit was really invention, intentional invention, to look at, to basically invent things that were likely to be strategic to the company or the company's competitors in the foreseeable future. Right. So it's sort of that process of trying to figure out what is new and what are the differentiating characteristics of emerging platforms, technologies, social behaviors, and so on. A kind of applied futurism, right? Mm-hmm. And doing that at scale with the goal of producing a defensive patent portfolio of hundreds of patents. Was really a lot of fun. For 4 years. So when I left there, what I like to tell people is that at a certain point, as lovely as that experience was, there were two things. One was it was really the only large company experience I'd ever had. I was drawn into it because I was an inventor. And a friend of mine was the head of intellectual property for Yahoo. And he said, we're in trouble. We're being mugged by patent trolls every day.
Yeah.
Can you help us build a defensive portfolio? So that was like sort of a big normal job. I've always been sort of independent. And then the second thing is, at a certain point at Yahoo, great as it was, as I like to say, all the flavor was chewed out of that piece of gum. And you could keep chewing it and it wouldn't come back. Yeah. So I said, okay, it's time to exit. And that's when I formed Invention Arts as a kind of continuation, but without the constraints of a large company, but also without the steady paycheck. Right?
Well, yes. That is the big difference when you're the person who set up the business, isn't it?
Right. And as an entrepreneur, that there are those folks who are very well suited to, to living and working within a community with that kind of support, and there's that steady paycheck. And they may even engage in innovation programs. But when you're an independent, for you vegans out there, I'll just say, you grow what you eat rather than kill what you eat. It's like you're responsible for it. And so that's kind of thrilling. And I think it's also the kind of pressure that helps you to, create the diamonds of what's new and interesting and powerful and potentially even for those legacy companies.
Yeah. And you're perhaps best known kind of within publishing for Aereo, which you sold to Ingram a couple of years ago. Where did that business come from? I'm assuming it sprang out of something that Invention Arts did.
Yes. Yeah. It was actually a product innovation within Invention Arts. And I should say that Invention Arts is kind of an umbrella firm as a design and product innovation. So, we are a small group, a sort of loose collective. And, projects of interest that seem promising, but are also personally interesting, are the kinds of projects that we want to pursue if we're fortunate enough to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
It's a real state of grace to be able to do that. And so I had decided, we put together a kind of program which I'm kind of re reintroducing now and doing some development on a large scale defensive patent portfolio for an industry, but now focused on blockchain. And there's you can go to inventor DAO.com and see that. But back then, I really didn't want to. I decided I didn't want to continue doing what I had done for a number of years with Yahoo. So what do I love? And that was, sort of books and publishing. So Aereo originally started out as something called Airbook, AERBOOK. And Nick Ruffalo, who you may know, who's a really fine technologist and a fine young man as well. He and I, so we evolved Airbook as a result of conversations that we had about building fixed layout books in the browser without writing any code. Okay. Right? That's where Airbook started. I mean, prior to that, in order to understand the industry, I started building ebooks. I tend to want to, just like I learned programming in order to build interactive fiction systems. I mean, if you do not have a grasp of the underlying technologies, then I really don't think you have a lot of business pitching anything or trying to imagine. So do the heavy lifting. You can learn anything if you really put your mind to it.
You have to know how it works and what's possible and what isn't, and what's easy and what's hard.
Exactly right. And so Airbook, originally it was just me. I stepped away from other projects and I was building fixed layout books or reflowable books. I built a kind of marketing system for that. My first customer for that was actually a guy named Jeff Bell. I get this email, JTK Bell, over the transom. I'm interested in your platform for my book. And so I got in touch, we got on the phone, and I said, yeah, and I see your book's doing pretty well. You got it up on Amazon. He said, yeah, actually, I work for Amazon. I said, really? What do you do? He said, well, I'm Jeff Bell. I'm head of publishing. He actually was my first customer. So we ran with that for quite a while, and then took that right turn into building the visual books in the browser, which was okay. I was building books with it. We did projects for Dominique Rocca's company, Sourcebooks, David Wilk and others. And it was sustaining, and we learned a lot, a great deal. But I was very much interested in, how what a lot of people, have the windmill that a lot of people have tilted at. In publishing, or people who would be publishing innovators, and that is, redefining books in terms of the new device that we have now. So, in addition to the linear text narrative, what John Ingram calls text under glass, right? Yeah. If you have a device that is geolocated and capable of any kind of media generation, commerce related, mapped into a social graph and so on. How does that set of capabilities change the nature of the book, right? How can it? And so that's what Airbook was focused on. But what I discovered after a period of time, and I've talked about this at length at the EPUB Summit. There's a video up on YouTube from 2016 about this, a kind of walkthrough, is that that while it may be powerful, it was structurally going to be very difficult, if not impossible, due to conflicting standards and non-standards. Yeah. It was, in building software, I've learned, and many people have learned, that you can go deep and take advantage of the unique capabilities of a particular platform, or you go shallow and build something that works across multiple platforms and intentionally avoids the unique characteristics of those other platforms in order to ship to a larger marketplace. And that's the dilemma for anybody who's trying to evolve the book,
Yeah. Which target do you pick?
Yeah, iBooks does one thing, but it's not a big enough market. Amazon has the market, but the platform is kind of goofy and
limited.
And limited. So at that point, Airbook, I didn't see it being viable, even though we could sort of, limp along and continue to do that and have a lot of fun with it, do those kinds of projects, but I didn't see the growth in it. Yeah. So so part of it was kind of attacking the problem at the root. The idea was if dominant centralized platforms can control the nature of the format
Mm.
and its capabilities, well, then you can, go through contortions to try to adapt to those, as I just described,
Yeah.
or you just try to create a new sort of decentralized platform and see if that can catch fire. And so it took me more in the direction of building direct to consumer commerce,
Hmm.
right? Rather than going through Amazon
Yeah.
or there's another windmill to tilt at, right? um, so that's what Aereo did. Aereo first, Airbook first, I built well, we designed and built, should say we, not I, but we built the commerce capabilities into Airbook
Hmm.
for direct delivery and marketing and so on. And then at a certain point, really de-emphasized the, book building
Yeah.
capabilities. Although by then we also had, reflowable EPUBs and so on in there. Still there, but focused
Mm.
on building a decentralized book selling network.
So kind of a product expansion, then a marketing pivot kind of thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely a pivot. So the idea there was to look at, I mean, my MO tends to be, look at what is, the medium we're working with, John, and you know this, is a shapeshifter,
Mm.
right? Every few years it shifts shape and capabilities. There was no social graph really 10 years ago. And then
Mm.
there's a social graph. There wasn't ubiquitous geolocated mobile phones. There weren't those 10 years ago. And when those happened, and before that, there were no CD-ROMs. And before that, there was no networked computers.
Yeah.
So it's always changing shape. And from a design perspective, it's like every so many years, okay, well, now I've just learned Sanskrit. Now I have to learn Chinese,
Yeah.
and now, it's a wholly different principles and ways of articulating and designing. So, so from a commerce perspective, what you saw was there's still tremendous decentralization, but centralization
Mm.
in Amazon, and I think effectively it's one
Yeah.
day. Obviously, is the most valuable company in the world, but also they were very smart about putting, and Google did this too with advertising,
Mm.
is recognizing that you had to put the whatever the transaction was at the point of engagement and presence for the user.
Hmm.
So for Google, ads would show up wherever you happen to be browsing, right?
Yeah.
And for Amazon, their affiliate program made it possible for you to spend time in one community online and then see the books or the products or whatever to purchase
Yeah.
right there. And so that became really the core of Aereo, which was to make any point of presence, an engagement, a point of sale.
Hmm.
And so we did a lot of work on the social graph and decentralizing and distributing. And at that point, I was working with Ingram. One thing I realized is looking at their way of doing business, they had this sort of 14 million print books and the means to order those and fulfill them. So I figured out with the team how to integrate that to make it possible rather than going to the publishing community and saying, "Hey, can I have some more books?" Well, let's go to this hub of 14 million books and ingest all of them.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And so then it made it possible for anybody to build a store um, with just a couple of minutes and no coding. And if they had a point of presence, they could light those things up. Um, and then there was a whole marketing component too, because we did have this online, and we do have this online, sampling and so on, which was really advanced at the time because the
Mm.
online samples were pretty, dreadful, pictures of pages as opposed to reflowable text, which
Yeah.
we adapted from the EPUBs. So those were the twin prongs. HarperCollins was really terrific because we signed up a big deal with them to use Aereo to promote their books,
Hmm.
and then with Ingram, eventually it made sense to roll it up. because
Yeah.
they had that kind of presence. So we did that, and I spent a couple of years working with them, advising and whatnot, consulting. And now it runs as an independent program with a heavy emphasis on direct to consumer for publishers. Uh, so I still think there's a lot of promise that is unrealized in the Aereo fully decentralized model for non-ordinary booksellers or empowering brick and mortar booksellers on the corner,
Mm-hmm.
at the corner store.
Yeah.
But having said that, it's wonderful to see it continue on in the way it has.
Yeah, and it's one of these things you always kind of, as you alluded to there, you often see that you start off tackling one problem, and then you spend some time on that, and then you tackle a different problem, and you kind of move to a side because you realize actually the problem that needs addressing is adjacent to the one you started on. I mean, have you generally found that your businesses follow kind of the path you expected, kind of fairly straight, or do they tend to veer around in response to markets or discoveries or whatever?
Hmm. I think the latter. They tend to veer. Um, it is when you start off with one idea and one
Mm.
destination in mind, and then it's like taking a journey. Like
Hmm.
you're in a forest, and then you realize that path is more promising. Or
Yeah.
I was walking around here. I'm in the southwest Côte Basque near in Biarritz, and there's another town right north of here called Anglet,
Yeah.
and they have a Chiberta forest, this wonderful forest near the ocean, near the bay.
Hmm.
And so I was wandering there with a friend, and discovered that there was a Chinese pavilion there,
Okay.
um, somewhere in the Chiberta forest. And I looked it up on my phone. I had a little bit of signal while I was hiking around there, and then I started wandering around looking for this Chinese pavilion,
Yeah.
and couldn't find it. I could find paths to it and so on. I think what may be metaphorically interesting here is I subsequently discovered that the Chinese pavilion was taken down about 40 years ago. It no longer exists. It turned out it was sort of a hangout for bad guys, and the mayor shut it down and they dismantled it.
Okay.
So so you can pivot, but it doesn't mean that you're pivoting to something real, right?
Yeah.
But but where you do find, you're pivoting to something real, it's always a result of listening to the world. The
Uh-huh.
world tells you, they're trying to tell you what they need, but you
Yeah.
have to have the ears to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of takes us to one of the other things I like to talk about. That you have to always be willing, I think, to learn, to listen, as you say. How do you go about learning to do it better, to listen more clearly, to focus properly?
I think for me, it's learned by doing. It's walking in the shoes of the person that you're trying to build something for,
Uh huh.
even if it's sort of play acting, right?
Yeah.
So say you're a music, and relates to a project that's underway, and you're a music company, and you're enjoying new revenue, due to the rise of streaming platforms.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, just as in the book publishing industry, you've lost um, some control to large centralized platforms.
Yeah.
So it's a devil's bargain in a
Mm-hmm.
way. And you now, though you're seeing increased revenue, you also do have a sort of limitation. That loss of control means that, well, you're riding the fortunes of the large centralized platform, and you've
Yeah.
lost a bit of position and traded it out for that. So what is it? What is it that you need? What could be done with existing and new technologies to give you something which is both tactical,
Mm-hmm.
provide a new line of revenue, and also strategic, get you back some measure of control and presence in your own industry.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is by spending time with people, and leave your smartest guy in the room thing at home, because you're not the smartest guy in their room.
Yeah.
You're not. You don't know what you don't know about their industry, and
Mm.
what's important to them may be entirely different from what you see from the outside. Um, so uh, so that's kind of the way to. I don't necessarily read business books. I mean, I think a lot of what I'm saying you'll find in business books and advisors and so
Yeah.
on. But it's really the experience of having been through that is what I rely upon.
Okay.
So in the case of and just to take that forward. So in the case of that music example,
Yeah.
there are what you will discover as a result is that there are untapped market requirements,
Yeah.
impediments for people to use the music they love on social networks, for example, due to licensing restrictions and so on.
Yeah.
And with some new technologies and capabilities, you could address that. And so then that gets to be really interesting to people and also fun, fun for you because you get to hang out in those fancy music industry boardrooms.
Yeah. So as you think about, your own business, we're working in this space, as you say, it's controlled by some very large companies and everything changes every few years and stuff. What do you think about, if you think, okay, I want Invention Arts to be around 5 years from now or 10 years from now, whatever. What do you think about to make sure that happens, that the business is still around?
Mm-hmm. Well, after many years of doing this, there's a few. I'm going to write my, Chairman Ron's Red Book someday, full of epigrams and sayings, the sayings. So, one is usually the best thing you can do, or frequently the best thing you can do is also the only thing that works. But in this case, to answer your question, the one that comes to mind is you are what you ship.
Okay.
In this industry, what you give the world, that's who you are. That's your legacy. And so your company, to be around, has to deliver things which have a life beyond you.
Uh-huh.
And to the extent that you can do that, then your company continues to be around. And in more practical and tactical terms, what it means is retaining the love of learning.
Uh-huh.
Because as we discussed earlier, you're in a shape-shifting medium, which has entirely new principles. Some probably unsurprisingly, I'm deeply immersed at sort of the systems level and in understanding both the economics and the primitives of decentralized systems.
Yeah.
That are, for example, blockchain-based, Ethereum, and so on. And these are and tokenization and what that means. And it's easy to sort of jump in and say, I get it, blockchain, Bitcoin, or I get it, blockchain, maybe I can do licenses.
Yeah.
And the reality is that you have to have a sort of love for the complexity, but also the simplicity in these new shape-shifted changes, and then do the work of understanding, spend the time to understand. Whenever you hit, I think half of learning anything new, which is part of, it's at some, we're an product innovation and design company.
Yeah.
Half of understanding these things is processing the jargon, right?
Yes.
You have to be willing to, and it's wonderful that we're able to do this. You come across terms, Harburger tax, or whatever it might be, a Schelling point. You have to be able to rabbit hole on those things and get an understanding, so that I get what that is, because those are the primitives that make up these new and the true capabilities of these new systems. And so that's a way to keep your company alive, at least in my business, is to retain the love of learning. If that feels like a chore to you, then do something else.
Yeah. So, if that's one of the things that you kind of grab onto, what is it that you find hardest about running a business personally, and how do you overcome that?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's always focus, I think,
Okay.
It's what do you say no to, right?
Yeah, it's always hard.
It's always hard, There are, fascinating things that you could sort of pursue, and sometimes it's really a dilemma. And so trying to judge where you should put your time and energy, which is really limited on this earth, let's face it. You have only so much processing time when you're thinking about things and building things. So what do you choose? It's opportunity cost.
Yeah.
There were points in my life where I was so obsessive about learning something that I resented sneezing because it interrupted my chain of thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You probably know that feeling, John.
Yeah.
Wait a second. Come on, I'm trying to think of how this works.
I've lost my train of thought. Ah.
Lost my train. Damn it.
Yeah.
I've also been the jerk and I'm not anymore, but I've also been the jerk who would say things like, okay, explain to me again how going to your parents' house for Thanksgiving is going to help me with my deadline. Right? You can't do that.
No, it's not conducive to all aspects of your life.
There's more to life than your death. Yeah. So anyway, that's
so what is it then that keeps you coming back to the business every day in the face of the challenges of all needing to learn and needing to all these kind of things we've talked about?
Well, it's the double-edged sword there. It's the challenge. It's a great demand, but it's also the great pleasure.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you like to learn things, and probably more importantly, if you like to build things and put them out in the world and see what they do, that keeps you coming back. It's not work. It's what you do.
Yeah. That's a great note to end on then. Well, thanks very much for your time, Ron.
Okay, John. Thanks very much for the opportunity. It's great talking to you.
This was Talking Through My Hat, a podcast by John Pettigrew, founder of We Are Futureproofs. Please let me know your thoughts by leaving a review at Apple Podcasts or by commenting on the website, myhat.wearefutureproofs.com. You can subscribe to this channel at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme music is from hooksounds.com.